Hey everyone, I'm Trent Kusters, co-founder and studio director at League of Geeks, and this is the Game Maker's Notebook. Today I'm talking with Onat Hekimoglu, the director, game designer, developer, writer, composer. Where they got a bunch of titles, these indie developers. I love it, wearing many hats. And of course, his pal and co-founder, Ole Tillmann, art director, puppet maker, writer, illustrator. They're two of the four co-founders of Slow Bros. And we get chatting, just kicking off like we usually do. We talk about what got them into games, and then we talk about how these unlikely friends with no skills in game development came about making a video game. We chart the 14 years from commencement of the video game through to shipping it, how they went through various things, raising funds, publishing, self-publishing, all that sort of stuff. Then we talk about why the game isn't a stop motion game. We talk about their unique workflow of taking these physical sets and physical characters that they built with their hands and making a real life, well, not real life, I guess, video game of it all. And what an incredible achievement that was. We talk about the trials and challenges within those workflows and their principles of that handmade interactive experience and a very important IKEA table. And then we wrap it with talking about post-launch life and what's next for the Slow Bros, which they assure me, although their name may suggest otherwise, is not another 14 years of development. They're absolutely wonderful guys, very thoughtful, very considered, and obviously incredibly persevering and patient artists. There's a lot in here, and I truly hope you enjoy this chat. Halibut is on Game Pass as well, so check it out. Ole, Onat, thank you for joining me today. I know it's early over there, 9:10. We've got a bit of a, with our producer Claudio in the middle of America and me in Melbourne. As you mentioned, when I got on, we've got a bit of a time zone triangle going over here. So thanks for joining me so early.
Thank you, Trent.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Awesome. Now, I'm super excited to talk to you guys. As I was sort of mentioning before we jumped on to the podcast, I've been following Harold Halibut for, well, I guess it's years now. When did you guys announce?
I think we released our very first teaser in 2016. So it's been quite a while. It's been 8 years or so. We are, in fact, working on the game since almost 14 years, or we're working.
Yeah.
We're finally finished. It feels strange to say we were working on the game, because but that was just the first idea. So we were working full time on it for 9 years. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, luckily, we've got at least 90 minutes to talk about that, but we're going to try and compress as much of that down as we can. So I'll hold your hand as we go through that and get it across. I'm really keen to hear that story. But the reason why I asked about the announce is I remember all those years ago, 8 or so years ago now, almost, when I saw it, I was just blown away. I was like, whoa, I think I was actually like, what the fuck? I think I said it out loud. Probably. And I was like, this game looks insane. And still playing it this week on my Xbox Series X, which wasn't even announced when you announced your game. It still looks impressive, So hats off to you. But we've got all the time we can to talk about that. So let's start the podcast where we usually do. It's always a great way to get things going. Ole, tell me your first memory of a video game. And this is kind of an interesting question for the two of you, because I know video games isn't like the thing that brought you together, right? Or you weren't game developers like, let's make a game. So I'm keen to hear, for video games for you, what was your first memory of a video game? Like when did it spark something in your brain?
For me, it was actually Doom. It must have been Doom 1 or 2. And it was my dad playing it, and I remember there was like a family discussion about it because I was kind of peeking over his shoulder, and I must have been, yeah, pretty tiny, still like in elementary school. Um, and my parents kind of getting upset about it back and forth as to like whether I should be witnessing doom or not. And but I was definitely fascinated.
Yeah, like
And then
figuratively
the
and
kind of
literally, right? Witnessing doom. Yeah.
yeah, yes. And then because the first thing that popped into my mind when you mentioned it, but this is connected to it, was Commander Keen, which
Yes. Yes.
was then what my dad went to. He like searched around for a game that would be more appropriate for my age segment. Um, so I could also get involved with like computer gaming at the time. I don't know where he
That's
found it,
great.
but yeah, that was, and then I really got into Commander Keen, and that was like the start of gaming overall.
Wow. That's awesome. Yeah, Commander Keen was on for me. I remember my uncle had Commander Keen on his computer, and me and my cousin used to just like spend hours on that machine, get dragged to dinner when it was ready, like kicking and screaming. That's awesome. What about you,
Yeah, I
Anna?
remember there being like sorry,
Yeah, no, go for it, Ole.
tiny more um just like one more discussion about the weaponry in Commander Keen then, because it was just one more moment of anxiety. It was like, Mom, check it out. Like we got Commander Keen. I think this is gonna be fine for me. No more violence. And she's like, there's still guns involved. He's still shooting. What's going on? And me being like, no, you're right. Oh God, but it's fine. He's just shooting like bananas and stuff. Like he's shooting slugs. I think we'll be
Yeah.
fine.
It's child-friendly violence, right? That's what it is.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. Family-friendly violence. I remember one
better than Doom,
Christmas.
definitely.
Exactly. I remember one Christmas. I can't remember what year it was, but I must have been like 11 or 12 or something. And my uncle, the same one that had Commander Keen, bought me Hexen for Christmas. And I remember unwrapping the box. You imagine being like 12 years old into video games and that like cover art with the hooded figure and Hexen. I was like, whoa, like it blew my little brain. And then still, as I was having that moment, my mum's hand like reached over and goes, I don't think so. And just like pulled it out of my hands and was immediately like, he's not like,
No.
he can't have this game. You've got to take it back. But I swapped it out for Ocarina of Time on 64. And that was,
Oh, nice.
definitely
Nice.
changed my brain, that game. So I'm not upset about that.
Yeah,
All
good
right.
switch.
Oh, Nat, what about you? Video games, when did they first enter your life?
So I was at a friend's house and they had a NES actually. So one of my first games that I saw and played was definitely Super Mario Brothers. Um, and in parallel, at my cousin's house, my cousin lives in Turkey. My parents are from Turkey, so most of my family is over there. So I only got to see him like once a year or so. But every time I was at his place, he just had this new PC, or it was an Amiga, I think, or so. At that time, he played all kinds of shooters. I think that was the era right after Doom where a lot of other things came out that looked similar to Doom. And I don't remember a single name of those games, but yeah, it was all kinds of shooters. And also there was a like 2D, was it Wacky Races or so game at that time? I remember that one where, it was a side scrolling car driving and also like trying to, you also had items like in Mario Kart or so, but it
Oh,
was a
wow.
2D side scrolling thing. Yeah, it was a very
Cool.
crude thing.
It's funny as kids. I remember when I was a kid as well. There was like there's games that you encounter, whether they're demos or whether they're at a cousin's house or something like that, that you don't ever know the name of, and they kind of
Yeah.
take up this mythical space in your head. I think there was one called Interstate 76 or something when I was a kid, and I
Oh, yeah.
remember because it was like a first-person driving game, and you could like aim your gun out the side. I played it like once, and then it became something else entirely, like years after in my brain. I never saw it again, but might be making all of that up. But yeah, it's
Yeah,
really
yeah,
interesting when you encounter those games that you don't get the full picture of and your mind just builds like this little mind palace around them. Yeah.
totally.
But the interesting thing about you guys as well is that, as I mentioned, right, it's not like, sometimes we get folks on this podcast and they're like, oh, we met when we all started at Activision together, or, we were in games college and blah, blah. But you guys, I mean, if I've got my story straight about Slow Bros, you came together through various other arts, and there was a friendship already kind of there, right? And Slow Bros and Harold Halibut sort of came out of that. So maybe Onat, why don't you talk us a little bit through those, because I want to make sure that we get enough time to really talk about Harold Halibut. And usually we would track your sort of path from, like that game, then leading you through like, your long story game career. But you guys kind of just like, went into this through puppet making or like whatever it might be. So tell me how, Onat, who's playing Super Mario Brothers and like these Doom likes when he's a kid, ends up making, a sort of stop motion like video game with his mates that he was sort of making doll houses with. Sort of chart us through those early days.
Yeah, so during high school, I actually wanted to become a doctor. So obviously,
And then something happened, and here we are.
something happened, and I've studied film, which was probably because I started to make films when I was around like in 11th grade or so, together with Fabian, who isn't here, but he is like our set architect and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And we started making films in high school. I actually then went on to study film, and once after finishing film school, it was this weird area in between where it's like, okay, I'm ready to do like bigger things. My first feature length film, I've written a treatment, and let's go. But yeah, it's not as easy as that. Because first of all, you need a budget, you need someone who wants to produce that, and so on. And I was kind of frustrated because how to say, not patient enough, which sounds strange because it took us such a long time to make this game, but yeah, we so I came to Cologne to work in an agency while thinking about ways to fund and finance that film, or how to do that, how to build my own team maybe instead of being dependent on other companies and stuff like that. And while doing that, I talked with Fabian and also Daniel, two of our co-founders, who and thought about because at that time I had found, coincidentally, I had found a point-and-click adventure game engine called Visioner Studio, which seemed like you can build your own point-and-click adventure with this. Just upload your backgrounds and your like sprite animation stuff like that. And I was telling them like, why don't we make a game? We could tell the story that we want to tell without being influenced by anyone else. We can do whatever we want, and probably it won't cost as much, and we will be done in 2 years. So that was basically the kickoff meeting, kind of. Ole entered the team like a couple of weeks after that, once we realized that we weren't good at art at all. In fact, yeah. In fact,
and how old were you all at this point in time? Like, what year are we talking here?
It's let me think, probably 2010.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. I think
And
it
so
was
you're all
2000.
kind of like are you at like college, university age, or
Yeah, as in mid to end to 20, mid 20s actually. Yeah,
yeah.
mid 20s. Yeah, and then so 24, I guess I was at 24 at that time. And the funny thing was, the core idea of the game was clear at that point, which was to make a stop motion game, in quotes, and set in an underwater world. And there were a couple of reasons for that. First of all, because people are like, how did you come up with the stop motion thing? That's so cool. And of course, it's because we love that style. But it was also, like I said, Fabi, Daniel, and I. So that was a couple of weeks before Ola entered the team. None of us could draw, and none of us could do 3D stuff or any other kind of, art related things. But we were quite good in like building things. So it was basically our inability to do anything else that led us to build the very first set of our game.
Isn't it
And
amazing how much creativity comes out of constraints, right? Like,
yeah, totally.
necessity, will breed like some of the most fantastic results. Ole, if I
Yeah.
may, you remember these times, no doubt, like when the guys approached you, do you remember the sort of the energy in the moment and the idea and sort of how it affected you?
Yeah, very much. So it started off pretty slowly in the beginning because I had just finished school and I studied in the US and I was still there. I was in California at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And they just called me for like a character design in the beginning. We all knew each other we were connected through our sisters in our hometown. As you said, like
That's
we
cool.
all like had some kind of familial connection in the past. Um, and so they hooked us up, and then they just asked me to come up with the design for their main character because they had come up with a room, and now they needed like people to be populate the rooms basically.
Right.
And I sent them back the sketch, and they kind of failed to make anything out of it.
Was that
But
your
yeah,
plan
here's.
all along, Ole? Had you drawn it just complex enough that you knew they would struggle?
No, they seemed very professional from the outside when they approached me.
Amazing.
But yeah, I sent them the sketch, and then nothing came of it really. And in parallel, I kind of failed to stay in the U.S. and make it through their like legal immigration system and everything. So I returned, fortunately, and yeah, then I just like kept visiting them, and the energy in particular, as you mentioned, it was like really noticeable. I don't know,
Mm.
because we started talking about the sketches, and I got into actually making those characters, and there was something very unique about like sitting together as the four of us and just thinking about um, the world and like this idea overall about story ideas, characters, and
Mm.
just that like sitting at the table, and you know when you hang out with your friends, and there's usually in a friend group you have at least like two of these kinds of friends that can like just like connect a chain of fantastical ideas forever, you know, that'll just like shoot at each other and be like, and
Yeah.
then he comes in, and then you know and then the fridge will be set on fire, and then and like it was that energy just like with between the four of us, and it's really really nice.
That's beautiful. And
Mm.
especially when it's usually with me and my friends, it's just stupid jokes. So it's
Yeah.
amazing when you it's like the absolute that rapport that you have, that energy is constructive towards like a commercial video game as well. It's amazing.
Well.
So like Onat, you mentioned before kind of in passing that you were like looking at these models, you know, that you had made. So you were actually making doll house sized models of the rooms, right? Like at the start, is that sort of how it would start off that early?
Yeah, so we just to see if that worked out, the idea of having a stop motion style on Big Adventure. The first thing we did was actually build Harold's room, which fun fact, pretty much half of the room even stayed like that from like that very first set we built. So it still
Wow.
exists in the game, and we have like different stages of it, which we kind of always use that room as a benchmark. We improved some parts of it, and then later, but in the very beginning, Harold Halibut was a classical, like traditional point click adventure game with puzzles, and then also with like photographed backgrounds and actual stop motion animation on top of it. And it evolved to this like hybrid thing, which is much more story focused and narrative focused than it is today, which I can talk a little bit about later.
Actually, I
But yeah,
might
it
get you
was
to do that right now,
okay.
actually,
Yeah.
because I always do this. I like launch. I'm so excited to talk to our guests that I just start like unpacking all these questions. And then I realize about 15 minutes in that our listeners are probably like, some of them are going to be like, what is this game? Hold on a second. What is
Oh
it?
yeah.
So why don't you for a
Yeah.
second just tell everyone what Harold Halibut is and sort of, what the sort of the spark of interest is for, folks who've been following it for so long is too.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, maybe then I continue exactly the way that I wanted to do
Yeah,
it.
do it.
It started out as a point and click adventure game, and we soon realized two things as a stop motion point and click. We soon realized two things. First of all, we had like these beautifully built sets and all those beautifully built characters. Um, but obviously we weren't experienced in stop motion animation either. So first of all, animating took quite a while, and it didn't look as great as in a stop motion film, first of all. But what's even more important was that compared with a stop motion film where you have backgrounds and like the characters are part of it and it's all photographed in in single frame, for a game, because of the interactivity, you have to separate things. So you have a background, you have characters as animated characters as a foreground, and then you, for all the directions, you have to kind of connect different sprite animations to each other and so on. And it always looked like a kind of cheapish Photoshop collage thing, which we didn't like. That was the what we didn't like on the visual side. And the on the gameplay side, like I said, we started out as a point and click adventure, but what we actually wanted to do was to tell a deep and engaging and immersive story and focus on that. And we had the feeling that puzzles in the traditional sense were just weren't the right fit for the game we wanted to do. And yeah, so it evolved to what it is today, which I would say is a like very narrative focused modern style adventure, a walking simulator, if you will. We kind of internally we sometimes called it an open world walking simulator, because it is relatively open in terms of like places you can visit and people you can talk to, because besides of the quite linear main storyline, you have like all kinds of side stories and other interactions with characters. It's all about the dialogue, by the way. Most like 95%, 98% of the interactions are talking with people. And it's all these optional things that you can do, talk and learn about the lives of other characters on this in this place that yeah, make that storytelling experience so rich, as we think. And yeah,
Wonderful.
that's basically a summary of the game. It's the story itself is set on a, so it's about a spaceship that traveled Earth on the verge of Cold War, from Earth on the verge of Cold War, to find a replacement Earth, kind of, because everyone was thinking the Earth is going to end, and they crash land on a planet. It's a generation ship, so 200 years pass on their travels. It's like the fifth generation on the ship, and they crash land on this water planet, which is basically a planet that seemingly consists only out of water, and now they are stuck there underwater since 50 years, trying to find a way to escape this place. That's basically the setup. But in its core, it's a story about friendship and life and human relationships in this encapsulated situation.
Amazing. Great. Yeah. And just really to drive it home, when, whenever Ole and Onat are talking about building the sets, they mean in real life,
Oh
like
yeah,
you would see in stop
yeah.
motion. Like I know that they've said it, but I just want to make sure that every one of our listeners like understands this. So and we'll get into that in a bit. I'd love Ole to hear, about the process of that and everything, and also just some of the things that we just heard Onat talk about in regards to, the visuals not really gelling. But I am keen to, just for folks, a lot of our listeners are folks who either, are executives of studios or publishers, or, are setting up their own studios, or game developers, or even just hobbyists that are interested in the business of video games and everything as well. And so it's fair enough to get together with, your your three mad mates and like always saying, like throwing things around and, having that sort of rapport and everything. But Ole, perhaps you can tell me a little bit about those early days in regards to like, how did you all go about actually setting up a company and talking about, how that would function between you, and, what were those, did you have any sort of commercial aspirations, or were you just like, let's try and get some money and see how long we can have this cool thing going for, we've got an idea that just needs to live.
Yeah, I'd say it was more so the latter, definitely the focus.
Yeah, that's
I
awesome.
mean, we recognized pretty early on that we needed to have some sort of commercial connection to it, and like be able to keep the boat going, basically. But so that was definitely part of that long-term journey. I think in the very beginning, we were just living off of the energy and working or studying independently is still, like finding the fairly little money we needed for living in whatever place and having it disconnected from the game making. But yeah, it didn't take us that long to recognize that like whatever we were working on here with the project with Harold, was, worth it to start taking seriously and kind of consider how to make into a business and where to find funding and all that. And so the first source of funding we found was like the local film fund. So in Germany, we have like at the time it was still like a loan and without interest. Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
That they would just like sort of invest into local companies for them to spend locally and thereby kind of, heat up the economy. And they managed to, at the time, this, 10 years ago or whatever, just had switched pretty recently into game making from filmmaking only, where that was a pretty established concept. And yeah, then we were kind of fumbling at the time with like how to make this happen, because it's a very bureaucratic process. It took us a long time. It was pretty frustrating, but that was our big first step into founding a company, figuring out how to pay people off of that,
Yeah.
how to even like stretch that money as far as we could. And then we just kind of went from like skipping stone to stone over time. From funding to funding, and just kept finding of money
Onat, do
to
you
put into
remember?
the project.
Was it just the four of you at the time, or did you expand at any point over the years?
So in the beginning, it was just the four of us for like the first 2 to 3 years. So in terms of a timeline, once we decided let's start working on this, in parallel, I had found master studies in game design. So I actually did my master's in
Oh,
game
you
design.
did? Great.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that was the
Like someone's
only.
got to know
Yeah,
something about this. We
ex-
need
ex-
one expert amongst us. Yeah.
Exactly, because I mean, you already briefly mentioned it in the beginning. None of us had any experience and any idea about how to make a game, and even the master studies, it's not about like, I didn't learn Unity there. I learned about a more general thing about games and theory and so on, which was
Yeah.
super helpful, by the way. And also, uh, the university also helped a lot with, for example, the funding stuff, because we didn't even know that something like that existed. So they kind of pointed us into like, okay, you could approach it from that direction next and so on. So that was the first part. That basically these first 2 years, while we were working on the first prototype of the game, it was just the four of us, and that led to the first basically stop motion point and click adventure prototype of the game, which we evaluated, and where we actually had the decision to try to find another way to, like, instead of having the 2D sprite based approach, try to go maybe with a more 3D approach, which I will come to in a bit. And then also changed it from being a point and click adventure to a narrative game, a walking simulator kind of game. And during that time, I also studied, like, just out of interest, started to study design part time. After that one as well. And then I met Ilya there, who was like the first other person beyond us four who kind of joined the team. First part time, and then getting involved more and more, similar to how it was with Ole. And
Yeah, cool.
Ilya is what we have internally always called the 3D mastermind, because he started learning Cinema 4D when he was like 6, and he didn't even understand. Yeah,
Yeah, I know
and
the
it was
type. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And he's this crazy guy. At that time there weren't any internet resources, and he didn't understood English. So he figured it out just by testing things, which is crazy. It took him
Wow.
like months to figure out an individual function, but yeah. So together with him, we developed the idea of like how we could 3D scan everything, and like there were different iterations in between with like normal mapped sprites, and then the photographed backgrounds projected onto 3D models, until we finally arrived at photogrammetry for 3D scanning, until we reached our current approach. But yeah, basically that was the first time where someone else came into the team, and where that was basically right after us funding the company and having the first, external funds, besides of having it as a part-time project on our own,
Yeah,
which
right.
kind of made sense, because finally we could, it wasn't like a normal salary we would pay to a professional person, but it was still a very low budget, let's try this out, but at least we could, for example, pay Ilya and ourselves during that time to cover a little bit of our expenses while still having to do part-time jobs or so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And were you part time for the entire development or production, or did it reach a point where you had enough sort of funding or anything to, because you're self published as well, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's not even like you had a publisher swoop in or whatever. I know you're on Game Pass, right? So I'm assuming there was a Game Pass deal there at some
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
Did you get to a point at some point in development where you were like, all right, everyone's full time, let's like bring this thing home? Or
Yeah.
was it a part time thing the whole time through?
No, actually, it was like I said, the first 2 years were definitely part time, and then like a total completely part time. Then it got, at least the core team, like the four of us, we
Gotcha.
were
I got that.
mostly working on it from like 2013 on or so. Or once, when did we found our company, Ole? I'm
2015.
Yeah, 20. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that was 2015. Okay, then maybe from 2015 on, about that time, we were working on it, mostly full time, with some, because all of us had freelance jobs even before that. That meant
Yeah,
that
right.
we could do like a job in a month. So it was, I would say, like 70%, 80% of our
Yeah,
time
that's
went
great.
into the game. And then we all, because of like the funding we got, we could also stretch that and do less and less freelance jobs, and also pay like Ilya, for example, and so on, who was also freelancing. So it had kind of worked that way, with like working 70% of our time on the game. And then once we had our first, or our publishing deal, so we signed with a publisher into, do you know when that was, Ole?
Yeah, 17 to
Okay,
20, 18 to
yeah,
20.
2017, 2018 to 20. Oh, in between, by the way, we also got another art fund, and also it puts some money from ourselves into the project, and so on. So
Hmm.
always, trying to work mostly on the game, so
Yep.
since 2015. And then with into 17 to 18, when we signed a publishing deal, that was the first time where we could actually extend the team even more. We had
Hmm.
Cardi, who worked on the 3D models and so on. So we grew to like 6 to 7 people, kind of
Yeah.
thing. We could finally focus on just working full time on the game until 2020, which was the next time where we were broke, because we mutually agreed on ending our publishing relationship with the publisher. And
Hmm.
also COVID started. It was like the dark times, as we call
Yeah,
it.
it's a
So
weird
broke.
time, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so everything slowed down to a halt, basically, like, trying to find funds, but then in the meantime trying to have money to basically, pay rent and all that stuff. Yeah, what's kind of necessary. But yeah,
Yeah.
and that was a slower, like 1.5 years, where like the core team tried to work on it as full time as possible again, but we had to do some other things as well.
Yeah.
And that was also the time where we were talking with Microsoft already, and got a Game Pass deal, which helped us to actually to actually self-publish it, because we were also talking with other publishers during the time, and thanks to the
Hmm.
Game Pass deal, we had the ability to go fully self-published and do everything as we wanted.
Congrats. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Thank you for the timeline. It's amazing. I'm actually just
Yeah.
digesting it because, what you said 2010 at the start, right? So for 14 years there. Like, it's a quite quite an odyssey for our friend Halibut,
Yeah.
and all of you. Um, okay, so with that in mind, now I am quite keen to, because I know a lot of our listeners are going to be, and now that we've got the sort of the backdrop of, how it all came together and how you're all working and the team size and
Mhm.
thing over the years and how it came to fruition. I'm really keen to sort of dive into the process here and talk about, the ways in which Halibut differs, and then of course talk about the game a bit, and your decisions around the particular turning points of design and everything. But let's start perhaps, Ole, with that moment that Onat was talking about, where you were working with the 2D sprites and it wasn't really coming together, that sort of that big first sort of pivotal shift in the art style. Do you remember that? Do you remember that feeling of like, it's not quite it, looking at it being like, it looks bad, or it's not quite coming together? Do you remember having the answer or knowing where it needed to go? Talk us a bit through that process.
Yeah, happy to. Well, the thing is that I wouldn't consider it a change of art style. I mean, retrospectively, of course, it kind of is, but the aspiration at the time, especially, was definitely how can we make this more playable, especially because that was the biggest thing. It felt kind of clunky and static as a game, especially not necessarily in looks. Like, especially every time we would look at it statically, in particular, the stop motion prototype we had developed, it looked beautiful and just like the way we wanted it to look, kind of. But then as soon as it would move, that would start to kind of tear into the illusion. And then especially in terms of like making it interactive and walk over to that bucket and pick it up, that would just kind of destroy it. And so we were trying to really preserve the style and the look of it, but at the same time make it more interactive and just like make it feel better, basically. And so that was our main focus at the time, and I was actually pretty concerned about it because I really appreciated the simplicity of like keeping the focus on building the puppets and animating by hand, and then just having fairly a small amount of elements to work with, because as you said, the creativity really like flows from restrictions, and keeping things like sort of fenced into a box and putting it into a 3D environment, and like getting the complex corners of Unity, the engine we worked with, involved, like kind of gave me like vertigo, like because I had actually worked at Disney, for example, at an internship there, and then continued to work with the people I'd gotten to know there in the past. So I'd gotten an impression of like deeper game development, basically, and like what it means. And I'd seen like the consoles of like 50 million bugs logged, because one tiny thing in the 3D
Because of one
environment is
animation.
off. Yeah,
You're
exactly.
like, we don't want that. We don't want that in our future. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And so I was concerned about that switch. And
I
at
love
the
it. You're
same
like
time, especially,
you're like the soldier that's come back from the warp and has to actually explain the horrors to everyone before they go there themselves. Yeah.
Yeah. But then Ilya in particular, the 3D mastermind, was able to convince me with his or it was Ilya and Onat together, just the experiments of 3D scanning and the way it looked and the way it managed to pick up and sort of translate light and the way physical objects look and all that. Like it worked pretty well, pretty much off the bat, like from the get-go. And so that then we just kind of restarted the experimental stage of like trying to figure out now how to make that look work in 3D.
And Onat, who's handling all the engineering, like the programming and stuff at this point in time? Like, because surely if you're trying to render, these things that to look as good as stop motion, we're talking about very, very high fidelity rendering, like techniques for video games. Like, and for a bunch of guys that hadn't made a game before, right? Like, it's understandable that Ole's trying to talk you off the game.
So that was actually me. But there were two things to note, because for a lot of people, it's like it's incredible. I mean, the lighting looks so great that I've rarely seen it. How did you manage it? And you have never done something like that before, which actually is the real thing. The story about it's actually easier than one might think. First of all, because of the film experience, all the things that were regarding lighting, and staging and like the camera, the shots, and so on. That was basically exactly how I would have done it in a film,
Mm.
and because you have the same tools in a 3D engine as well. You have lights, you can light things the same way, kind of. There are obviously limitations, and which we didn't know about in the beginning. So what I did in the beginning was I used too many lights, too many shadow casting light, which again, costs a lot. So the game didn't run on any, wouldn't have run on anything the way we worked on it in the beginning, but it still looked the way we were imagining it to look, because it was basically the same way as we would have lit them, the objects in the real world, kind of.
Hmm.
So that already helped a lot. But another, by the way, important thing to note was we were always aiming for a very cinematic look and feel. And that would have been another limitation of the stop motion point and click adventure thing, because we basically have those dioramas with characters walking through it, and then because of transporting the whole thing into a 3D world, we were able to actually have all these cutscenes with different camera shots and camera
Yeah.
movement and all that kind of stuff. So that gave us a lot of freedom in terms of that. So yeah, in terms of engineering, I really I'm good in experimenting and learning, details and so on. And it was together with the experience from I think that that was actually the part that felt less intimidating than one might think, because it
Mm.
like, especially because a lot of things inside of Unity can be done, especially when it comes to the visual things, can be done without any kind of programming or engineering. So these
Yeah.
parts came later. In the beginning, when we were just experimenting with would that be a viable approach for our game, when it came to rendering, most of the stuff we could just do like that, in the editor. I learned how to
Right.
use
Like just
lights.
out of the box, out of Unity. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And then there was another important thing, that, which is, by the way, probably one of the reasons why it still looks like, recent. I mean, if you think about it, we started with Unity 4.6, which was, yeah, like I said, more than 9 years ago. I don't know, when did we start to work in Unity? 2000, yeah, 2013. So
Mm.
it's basically 11 years ago we started to work in Unity. And we updated the engine always. And the funny thing is, especially at that time, Unity was quite a bit behind what you were known from, like, AAA games. So for everything that I saw in a AAA game, like, oh, there are these soft shadows with penumbras which look like real shadows in the real world, I was like, okay, but if this already exists in the AAA game, it will probably come to Unity in the next 2 or 3 years. And so oftentimes, actually, we were just hoping and expecting technologies that didn't exist yet in our engine to come into it in the next years, and kind of kind of
I'm
hope.
laughing because like the amount of times in our studio we would be like just praying that a feature was coming in like 2 to 3 releases of like Unity. It's like I hope they'll just fix that, or maybe we'll get that in the next like 2 to 3. Yeah, surely. I see it on the roadmap. It's coming.
Yeah,
That's half of Unity development. I'm sure if you're on the other side of the fence with Unreal, it's the same as
yeah,
well.
yeah,
When you can't tap someone on the shoulder to say, put this in the engine, like you're
yeah,
just waiting
exactly.
for the next release.
Yeah. And it's actually crazy because a lot of people at that time were like, yeah, once you start working on a game, don't update the engine, don't update to a newer version. And honestly, until like 1.5 years ago, we haven't been outside of a beta version of Unity. Like, up to like very late in the development, we were only using like the bleeding edge just to get everything we need into it. And then just recently, moved to the LTS version a year before our release, basically,
Good, better
which kind
late
of
than
worked.
never. Yeah. Is that when you saw those 50,000 bugs, Ole? Did that moment happen?
Yeah, it definitely did happen in between there. But I was just thinking that like we did have very early on the opportunity to tap Unity on the shoulder and ask them to implement features for us, which I
Oh,
also
that's
thought was
awesome.
interesting. Yeah,
That's
because of
great.
the film thing is, I think, is how it first happened. It was Onat
Yeah.
writing them through like the forum or something, and then very quickly getting kind of connected up the chain to suggest like film specific features and
Yeah.
Well,
get
yeah, I
into
can
Hey,
imagine.
shout out to Adam Myhill, by the way, if he is listening
yeah.
to this, because he was the guy who invented Cinemachine for Unity. He isn't working there anymore, but it was basically this very amazing procedural camera system for Unity, which like really helped improve the workflow of adding cameras and shots and so on
Mhm.
inside our engine. And there were some, when I tried it out, I was blown away, but then there were also some things which were like not intuitive for me as a filmmaker. It seemed like, oh, this doesn't make sense. I think in one of the earlier versions with the depth of field, for example, the aperture had a opposite effect on the depth of field. Normally the lower the aperture, the bigger, the more out of focus things are, and that
Yeah.
was the opposite way around in Unity. So I was
Mhm.
writing in the forum with my film specific knowledge and saying like, guys, this isn't right, you should make it like this and so on. And Adam was like, "Oh, what are you actually working on?" And I showed him our first teaser, and so yeah, that's how our contact kind of established, and it was a really nice working together. Us kind of helping improving the film specific aspects of that, and they are helping us out because we got what we needed basically for our work, which was a really nice partnership, and which lasted until today. We're friends with the graphics team especially, which also helped shape the visuals, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah. What a forum mic drop moment as well, when someone's like, you're giving someone advice about their camera tools, and then they're like, what are you working on anyway? And you get to drop the teaser of the Harold Halibut
Yeah.
game. Yeah, no wonder like it went up the chain very rapidly and you got connected.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah, kind of.
It blew me away. I'm sure that there are people at Unity. I just love that as well. When folks at Unity or Unreal or any sort of tools, crew, like they see people doing like amazing things that they maybe hadn't expected with their engine. Like it just has so much so much impact like internally at those organizations. Did you see a bunch of that? Do you remember that like throughout your development of like Harold sort of like making waves within particular organizations of whether it be using their tools or Xbox or whatever it is?
Yeah, definitely. It was actually, I always tell everyone that we were really lucky because of our visual style. Because a lot of things that are super hard, especially for first time indie devs with absolutely no experience at all, were really easy for us, or kind of worked out by themselves, starting with the publishing deal, for example. We started a Kickstarter campaign just before that, trying to fund. We are so glad, by the way, that this didn't work out, because the amount of money wouldn't have been even close to enough to even,
No. Yeah,
and
yeah.
also like all the people complaining about, hey, wasn't it coming out to 18 and it's like 5 years after that and stuff like that. So yeah, but thanks to that,
Dodged the bullet there.
we were, yeah, exactly, we were approached by like 8 or 9 publishers, and I know from like other friends of mine who are working on beautiful games, great games and so on, that play nice, who are struggling to find a single one who's interested, because there are so many games. And yeah, kind of our visual style set it apart and gave us like a lot of attention in a lot of places. So starting with the first public trailer teaser that we released, which we didn't know anything about any kind of algorithm or any kinds of outlets or any kinds of multipliers that we should use. We just uploaded a trailer on YouTube and got 100,000 views, which was like, oh, cool.
Wait,
And
you just uploaded it and then like you
it
did
was just
nothing?
nothing. We didn't. I mean, we had Facebook at that time. We have Twitter? I'm not sure if we had a Twitter during our first trailer. I don't think so. I think
Wow.
we posted it on Facebook, but that's it. It's basically just went up from alone.
It's like
So
your
again,
sister's saying, "Wow, looks cool, guys," and then everyone letting like 20,000 people underneath.
yeah,
Yeah.
kind of like that, and it was the similar thing with everything else basically as well. Like like I said with the Cinemachine thing, it would have been probably a very nice conversation nonetheless, even if we had another game,
Mm,
But thanks to how it looked, Adam was like, "Oh, cool, let's just talk about." And then I think the next thing was probably that we showed how we did certain things during the Unity keynote, which was really great. So
yeah,
even more people saw it there, and then one came to another. So yeah, the publishing deal, like I said, kind of worked out from because of the Kickstarter campaign, because
yeah,
our publisher at that time saw it there, and then even after that, when we were whoever we approached, there was at least the look of the game was at least enough to start talking with them, even if it didn't lead to something in the end in some
mm,
cases, obviously. So not everything worked out as we had hoped for, but yeah, so that was really helpful to have a game that just looks good, I guess.
yeah. And Ole, do you remember specifically, because the visual style was so striking, right? And like even from those early days, and it sounds like even before you made this switch to the models, it sounds like you were quite happy with like what it was looking like aesthetically, at least when it was static, right?
Mhm.
So you're clearly onto something, but you had this not only in the physical stop motion sense, and what you were doing there, but in making a game and how to then like make it all come together technically. Do you remember having any connections sort of outside of what you've already spoken with Unity in regards to people who had, had success with stop motion before, or the type of development that you were doing with this like phototelemetry stuff and everything? Photogrammetry, sorry.
No, I don't
No?
think
You
so.
just kind
We
of
got
like
to
just waded through, just cutting down like cutting down problems like the thicket of the jungle as you were making your
yeah,
way underneath.
really, that was the biggest part of the issues that made it take so long because yeah, photogrammetry was still like in its infancy in connection to game development. At least I think
Mm,
in retrospect, I know a couple of things had happened in parallel, definitely, but I don't think we're aware of much at the time. I remember Star Wars Battlefront using
really interesting.
photogrammetry and being aware of that somewhere along the path. And then we, at some film festival, we met the people from Vocabulantis,
Hmm.
which is a game that is using stop motion for real. They made a game out of like recorded stop motion footage.
Wow.
Um, yeah,
Hmm. What was that
but yeah,
like
other than
exchanging
that,
notes? Were you
oh, lovely. I don't know.
were
They're
they the
like
ones
the
now that had
serious
seen the
people.
other side of the warp? Like, were they coming to
Yeah,
you with the horrors? Yeah.
um, no, but they were much more of like the deeply committed animator type people, anyways. Like animators are like tough people. I don't know.
Yeah.
They tend to be like
Yeah.
really committed to just like sitting in a place for days on end and just like animating away.
It's
And
a whole other breed of patience, isn't it,
yeah,
animators?
yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Um,
Well, look, what I'm keen to jump into now then is like, let's talk about the actual process, if you don't mind going through, and you guys can sort of ping pong back and forth, but maybe we'll start with you, Ole, and I'm happy for you guys to take it how you wish. But tell me about your actual process from like starting a scene to getting it into the game and making it interactive with a character and everything. Like how, from beginning to end, sort of walk us through the process for our listeners here.
Yeah, so that would usually start out with that like fun base I was talking about in the beginning, like our quasi writer's room, the four of us sitting together and just like uh, with like verbal sketches, essentially, just like bantering around until we land on a good thing. We also developed like a rough outline of the entire game pretty quickly in the beginning because we knew it was going to be story oriented. We developed an idea of like the story pretty quickly and started refining that. Like, uh, it's hard to put into the timeline, but we definitely like I remember some like really intense summer of just like sitting down and like figuring out all the characters, all the places, and just like nailing it all down. And then it was just more of a challenge to still keep it loose enough to be able to weave in game design afterwards, because we were aware enough at the time that was going to be the challenge from there on out. Is kind of like how to make this playable. We couldn't just like write down one singular thread of story and then make it linearly. We would have to continue to kind of deal with how to make it into a nice game. But yeah, so writers' room, sitting together, having a story, coming up with characters, and then we kept, especially in the beginning, we were pretty concerned with the like building location and characters bit by bit into place, and that I don't know how fine-grained we should get with this making of the thing, but yeah, basically that was mostly Fabi and me coming up with the specific locations, building something in the workshop, bringing it back, scanning it in our 3D scanner, which is just like a little IKEA breakfast turntable with a single camera. Because yeah, photogrammetry, for if you don't know, it professionally works by setting up hundreds of cameras around an object and then just snapping a picture.
You're telling me you don't have the
Other,
same setup as DICE in Stockholm
yeah.
for their Battlefront
Yeah.
series? Dude, the images I have in my head of all of your like your ad hoc photogrammetry gear, I'm feeling is incredibly accurate to what
Yes, most likely, exactly. Yeah.
And
So
at one point, we
these
actually, at
yeah,
one
go for
point, we exchanged the IKEA turntable with a what we thought was a better one, but it just didn't feel right. So we switched back to the technically, whereas it felt like we were betraying our setup. So yeah.
Very good.
But we switched out the camera actually because it turns out like during the process, the photogrammetry process, in total we took over 1 million photos, and it turns out a DSLR camera, the mirror of a DSLR camera isn't made for so many photos, so it actually broke, and so we switched to a mirrorless camera after that.
You took so many photos for the game, the camera broke. I love it.
Exactly.
Did you even know what was? How did you even figure that out? Like, did it just stop working? And you're like, what the hell?
Yeah, it wasn't clicking anymore. So the mirror, because you usually hear the mirror clicking, even with it. That's the analog sounding sound of a camera, because usually yeah, exactly, because it's not the film anymore, and it's like, why doesn't it click anymore? And then we saw, and it was kind of the mirror was stuck, and it was like, okay, maybe it's time for a new camera.
All right. So these designs, Ole, do tell me about that process of you and Fabian. Are you sort of two sitting next to each other in a room? Are you sketching and he's sort of like piecing things together? Are you both hands on with the build?
Yeah.
Like,
all of that. Yeah, that was to me
correct,
the
yes.
the loveliest part of the whole thing. Really is it was even sketching in the like writer situation when we were together. That was always a kind of iterative back and forth of producing a drawing from our latest discussion about, say, a new room that we had just thought up of, and then the drawing would be kind of like the final printout of the like session we had just had, basically, to kind of agree upon, like, hey, everyone, is this what everyone is still imagining? And then people could kind of nod it off or be like, no, actually what I was picturing is for that table to be green or bigger, or to have a big door back there or whatever. And then then the Fabian and I, that was kind of sad about it, was that we were isolated in the beginning, because we went from like bedroom building to like individual. We had like a tiny workshop in one place and then a tiny office in another place, and it wasn't that far. It was still like like a couple kilometers or something. We were able to walk over some of the models we had finished. But yeah, we were separated for a couple of years where we're kind of doing most of our day-to-day work in separate places. but yeah, then it would be
Which is
Bobby and
sad. With
me.
four people, it's basically two people in one place and two people in another place. You know.
And then,
Yeah,
and then these men just mysteriously walking tiny people and tiny homes between each. The whole
really.
the village must have been erupt with rumors. I can imagine.
Yeah, it was so funny. I would literally be like at the baker's with like a miniature puppet in my hand, to like great confusion because I was stepping in between the workshop and the office and trying to pray it over. Uh, Made for a
That's
great
awesome.
conversation. Yeah.
Okay, so you were
But
talking
yeah,
about
so
you have it on the IKEA table. You've got and are you scanning the models on the IKEA table, like the character models, as well as the actual sets themselves, or did characters have a separate process from the sets?
we did scan both of them in the same place, but then for sets, we also started getting wrapped up with like friends of ours who were developing, who were like deeper level nerds than us even, and because they were all studying like they're studying like hologrammetry or something, like
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
my field of study is like holograms and like I'm doing like camera lens optics and like how they affect whenever one wrote some type of dissertation on like plant growth algorithms,
I feel like
that level.
every game developer needs a hologram nerd on their side. It's got to give some
Yeah,
sort of
yeah,
extra buff to
yeah,
your
for
game
sure.
development for sure.
Yeah. And they were working on like their custom scanning method basically. So they had come up with a whole nother type of 3D scanning method that was
Material scanning.
especially, yeah, material scanning, but right, officially material scanning, but it was still like from scanning our three-dimensional objects basically.
Mm.
Uh, and yeah, that was their like proprietary method, which didn't, since this is years ago, didn't end up working out sadly as the company they were working on it with. But they helped us tremendously, like making amazing scans of all our environments, all the sets, and all
Very
the
cool.
flat surfaces, basically.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, that enabled us basically to get physically based materials in one go, kind of. So we had like physically accurate roughness maps and like normal maps and so on from all the flat surfaces. So we couldn't use it for character models, for example, but we at one point we started, after the sets were built, we split them into their individual walls, and once we had flat surfaces, we could just put them through their material scanning device and get all those really nice high definition textures and material values basically.
Wow.
So that helped a lot with the manual work that would have been needed afterwards, which we will come to in
Yeah.
a bit. So
Yeah,
I'll leave.
avoided a couple of painful steps there for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
So tell me about the next steps then. So you've now scanned them. What are they doing when they go into the game? On that, you've got your characters, you've got your environments. What happens with the environments?
Yeah, so once I think we had left it at the photogrammetry, right? Yeah, so after the photogrammetry process itself, there's still like a lot of manual work involved. First of all, with like cleanup and because in the end after the 3D scan process, we have like high poly models with millions of polygons, which
Mm.
aren't game ready, and also bad topology usually. So the character models, or pretty much all the models were kind of rebuilt manually from our 3D artists. So we had like really nice game ready models that could be animated as well.
Yeah, they do
And
look
then
great.
and then we yeah and then we baked all the details and the textures and so on from the high poly models to the low poly models. And like I said, through the material scanning device, we could that saved us a lot of time in terms of defining the material properties for all the flat surfaces, which is especially sets and so on. For
Hmm.
everything else and for additional details, we then went into Substance Painter to kind of manually define the material properties, because the 3D scan only gives us basically the base color of the object.
Yeah.
And a great thing, by the way, was that we always had the real models there. So, you could always shine a spotlight on things and see how they react to light to actually nail the values in Substance Painter, so that they work the same way, kind of, the real models and their digital representations,
Oh wow. Oh, what a
which
cool
really
little trick.
helped.
That's awesome.
Yeah, which really helped nail the exact, exact behavior, and which made the, digitalized models look so close to the original ones.
Well, it's funny that
Um,
you say that because when I was playing the game at one point, I was, I'm obviously playing. No doubt everyone comes to this game discerning it intensely about like
yeah,
how much it looks real or like actual stop motion or whatever because of all the effort that you went through, right? And so I'm doing that. I'm looking at it, and at one point I'm like, oh, it looks gamey at some points, but it is so lifelike. And then one of your fantastic cutscenes played. It was the announcement at the start of the game. And
yeah,
after the announcement, it cuts back to, or no, it was the animation in the announcement about the generation chip. And then it cuts back to the character, I forget their name, sorry, who's announcing,
yeah.
making
So
the
yeah,
announcement for all water. And they just like when you go from the animation back to your like in-game view, it's mind-blowing how realistic it looks. Like after you've been sitting in game for a while, you're like, oh, okay, cool. But then when you see the contrast between like a 2D animation or something, and then you go back to the game. And it's specifically the thing that got me was the lighting and like how brilliant the lighting is and how just realistic it looked is it real. And so that spotlighting little hack that you're talking about there is I can see how it's come into play.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, that was definitely super helpful to have, the real things as an additional reference, even for, the later. If, for the first sets, we even had them lit in the real world to kind of recreate them in the digital. At one point, we got used to, how it works basically, so we didn't need that step anymore. But
Yes, right,
that was
okay.
definitely really interesting. And then, once we are in Unity, it's actually it's just a normal 3D game, right? So we
Yeah.
basically have just normal 3D models, normal characters. One additional thing that was quite important was then the animation part. And while it's basically just 3D characters that are rigged in a normal way, and we could animate them in any way, we or in general in all the processes, even in the pure digital ones, we thought about ways, how we could, it was always a matter of balancing things. So for example, we experimented with a lower frame rate for animations, and I noticed that it didn't work well. It didn't feel nice. It felt more like a stutter, for example, because you're playing it and not just watching it like a stop motion film. But then also for the facial animation, we saw that, okay, if we limit the facial animations to just the key poses and don't blend between them, so we have a certain, stuttery movement there, that works really well. So it was always a combination. So we have basically fluid body movement, with the frame rate of the game, but then, stop motiony facial animations and so on. And I think the combination of all these, like both the pure digital stuff and like the analog inspired stuff, in the end made the look both uh, physical looking, but still modern feeling, or so kind of. I
Hmm.
think it was a
Did
good
you have
balance
any?
approach.
It sounds to me, Ona and Ole, like you. It's funny. It's not like you were doggedly just trying to create a stop motion game and everything's got to be stop motion, right? It really seems like you were pursuing something else. It was somehow somewhere in the middle of it, like whether it's just something more cinematic or something to do with the narrative. Did you have, classically in game design, as you probably know, we'd be calling this something like pillars or the game's razors or, the art direction principles or something like that. Did you have any sort of guiding northern lights or pillars or principles or anything, Ole, that you remember like falling back on when making the call about, hey, let's not animate on sixes or eights or something because it's not working, or was it just like literally the four of you just kind of like gut feeling it and following your intuition through the process?
Yeah, it was definitely a lot of intuition was like huge on this project. I would say is a lot of things kind of um, came from our guts. But in
Yeah.
terms of
And
pillars,
maybe
we
that can
definitely.
That can seem reductive, but like intuition is also your taste, right? Which is refined over many years and everything too. So, the
Yeah,
four of you in the room together, like trusting each other's taste when you're looking at something.
yeah, exactly.
Mm.
But in terms of pillars, I'd say the biggest guidance was definitely um, trying to focus on like what made the handmade quality of it nice, like trying to
Mm.
not reduce it to like reproducing a stop motion film, or just really reproducing the look or something, but like trying to copy the and there it gets to intuition, is like the soul of whatever the handmade thing, what makes that beautiful, take that into the game thing, and always under um the addition of like making it playable, and not kind of forgetting that. And that was that first step I was talking about in the transition to the 3D realm, was that the noticing that it didn't work out interactively, and cutting into the stop motion principle for that reason.
Mm.
And I think the stop motion guidance was always like, we'd use that for like, for example, for like VFX or something, we'd always kind of come back to that and be like, well, or the lighting, as Onat said, like how would we have done that had it been an actual stop motion set?
Mhm.
Because yeah, like all the sets were individual rooms we had built, and then were only assembled to a set um, virtually in Unity. But
Oh.
then it would still, like have to be lit as if it were an entire set. And then we would
Mm.
come back to, okay, we would put up these tiny lights here and these tiny lights there. We'd probably have like a fog machine coming from the right or something, blowing stuff in here. That always helped to kind of consider that perspective. But then again, yeah, always checking back with like, does this work? Does this feel right? Are we doing this just because we need it to look like stop motion, or are we doing this to like advance this as a game, as an interactive experience, as like a cultural thing to consume? I think we went back to that. That was probably the pillar element, was trying to consider like players' perspectives too, and
Mm.
considering it from the outside, kind of like, yeah.
It's incredible when you say that. It's funny how like pillars can do this when they're sort of revealed, like or the central theme, or a creator's thrust throughout like a work is, as soon as they're revealed to you, like everything kind of can fall into place. And it's like, yeah, well, I can see when it's like handmade, but making sure that it works in an interactive fashion for the player and as a video game and as a new cultural artifact, like that, all of your decisions make sense along that path. I really specifically love, that idea of a sort of looking at it from the lens of, what if we were solving this problem physically? Like, what would we do? What if it wasn't a video game and it was handmade, and changing that perspective, as you say, Ole. The
Yeah.
interesting thing that you do mention is the players, right? And the audience. Now, because I'm sure, because we have a ton of them in video games, diehard fans of every particular subgenre and interest. Did you find people on, who were like, this isn't stop motion, it's like, did it's actually like, it's animated in game or whatever, like, how did you go with the community through this? Did you have people like that really get it? I mean, the game's rated well on Steam. Obviously the reviews are great for the game. Tell us about, once you're sort of your these pillars, and this, I'm not talking about the game in general, I'm talking specifically about what you're achieving to do
The
here with
stop
this.
motion, yeah.
Yeah, the stop motion /
Yeah,
handmade
yeah.
quality of things. How did that land with folks, before and after release?
It's a funny thing because first of all, it has been always super hard to communicate what exactly it is for games press, especially, or in
Yeah.
general, the official things. Because no matter which interview we had, in the end, it was like, oh, the stop motion game, and then we
I
were,
knew, I was
and then
basically
people
setting you up to talk about that because I knew
exactly,
that would have been your entire
exactly, yeah.
experience.
and then and then it was always, then people were like, oh, it's actually not stop motion. Why did they talk about that? Because they were always like the ones that were really deep into that. They were like, that were explaining it from the community. No, it's actually, this is how they made it and so on, but
Yeah.
it's not real stop motion, but it's actual hand built puppets and this and that. And then but it took us such a, even like when we were working with Pop Agenda, who is our like marketing partner, lovely people, by the way.
Yeah,
We
they're
were
awesome.
like, these were one of the first things we said were like, for all the press releases or special introductions for press and so on, can we please make sure that they get that fact that it's not actual stop motion. It has to, maybe we should call it stop, which is why we moved from, I think it was we called it stop motion first, like 12 years ago or so,
Yeah.
probably. And then we quickly moved to handmade, and then it
Yeah.
kind of, and there were several iterations of this, of like, it's a stop motion style. But then if
Mhm.
you write stop motion style, people still write, oh, it's a stop motion
Yeah.
game. It's,
Ah,
yeah.
dude, I
I
feel your
think in
pain.
the
So,
yeah, but in the
well,
end, I think it didn't matter too much, because in our own communication, we never said that. At least not since it's not stop motion anymore, which is probably 12 years or so. But and then usually there was this like, oh, I don't really get how they did it. Did they really capture it stop motion? And then usually other people in the comments in YouTube, for example, start to explain the actual process, and then the others are like, oh, that makes sense. And then there is a small, very small group of people who are like, ah, that's really bad, it's not real stop motion. But it's only a handful, there are like I would call them the stop motion purists, who are like, oh
yes.
no,
Yeah.
this is not all like analog goodness.
Yeah, they're like, I'm only buying the game if there's blood coming from the developer's fingertips when they press the button.
Yeah.
I want to see
Exactly.
splinters in their skin. Yeah. No,
Exactly. Yeah,
totally.
but it was interesting. It was so funny, because every time, up to like even like during shortly before release, there were still so many outlets who talked about the stop motion game.
Isn't it funny how some things stick? Like, we released Solum Infernum at the start of the year, which is essentially a digital board game. It's a political grand strategy game, but it's got hex tiles, and you move some military units around the hex tiles, and there's leader type people that you talk to, you interact with a lot. And we would cite Civilization when we would talk to the press, because we'd be like, it's like Civilization, but it's not. It's like, just to get them. And the moment that we did that, everyone was like, Civilization in hell, Civilization in hell, Civilization in hell. And I was kind of like trying to press the brakes. I was like, no, 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 no. Stop the train. We're not going to that station, please. And then at the end, I was just like, yeah, it's Civilization in hell, whatever, okay. And then when it got released, still to this day, we get some people who buy it, and they're like, this game isn't like Civilization, but it's cool, but it's not like Civ. And we're like, we know, don't worry. It's
Yeah,
like, it's catchy, if it sticks, it sticks. So, and I think
totally.
you're right with the stop motion thing, right? If people are arriving because they heard that, it's still delivering that
Yeah.
fantasy in some way or another to the vast majority of those people.
Exactly, and it works. It's not technically, it still kind of fits. What was a bigger problem was actually the genre, because people kept calling it a point and click adventure, which it is definitely not. It's a walking simulator, and I think that was again a decision we made like 8 years ago or so, or 10 years ago. We, in our press kit, I think we just even called it narrative game. We called it narrative adventure first. We then started calling it narrative game, because having adventure written there led people to call it point and click adventure. And even
Yeah.
now, up to this day, it's very interesting. If you look at the Steam genres we have on Steam, I think I might have even removed adventure completely, just to avoid completion. And I think the third genre thing is walking simulator. Just to make it clear, it's not. You don't have puzzles in our game.
Yeah.
You don't have to combine inventory items and so on. And then you still see reviews like, "Yeah, you can't combine any inventory items. It's the worst point-click adventure I've ever played." Which is kind of like, yeah, but it is not one. We have never advertised it as one. I think it's partly also because people aren't used to third person walking simulators, which is interesting, because usually those are, first person. Firewatch now, I still Wakes the Deep just came out. Never didn't play it, but it looks really nice, by the
It
way.
looks great. Yeah.
Yeah, and all these kinds of games, the Invincible, which came out like 1-2 years ago, 1.5 years ago, or I think, or so. These
But
are
you're
all
right.
first
Your
person games.
format is different for a
Yeah,
walking simulator. It's always hard when you're the first one into the breach with those things, like that's the danger of like
yeah.
reaching the edge of a medium and like pushing out and planting your flag and sort of creating a new cultural artifact in a particular direction of whatever that medium's like territory may be at the time. It's like you're always going to have some people that join you and go, whoa, this is so cool out here, and then someone's going to be like, this isn't a fucking point and click adventure. I understand adventure. And you're like, bro, we're charting new territory here, sit down, enjoy the ride. Oh, hell yeah. Okay, well, did we finish we're getting wonderfully off track, I love it. Did we finish the yeah, we did. So we talked about getting the characters in and your,
Oh yeah, yeah. Maybe
between
one
the stop
more.
motion and
Yeah,
everything. But as you were saying, I guess once the characters and the sets are in game, it's like it is then effectively just video game development at that point in time, right? Like
exactly. Yeah, one more interesting, like Ole said, the continuous consideration of, at least looking at things like, can we bring a little more stop motion in here in the VFX, for example, or the water. We first had a water where Ole actually built 4 different water surfaces, which we scanned with the material scanning device to have their
oh
normal
wow.
maps. And we swapped out the normal maps. So we actually had like stop motion looking water surface, which turned out to be a bit too like the,
It
the
didn't
movement
gel
was too
with
fast.
it wasn't
Yeah.
like it didn't
No,
gel with the rest of the environment or something?
yeah, it worked really well, but it was a bit too fast, kind of. And if you slowed it
Ah.
down, so we would have needed more frames, and like the animation was a bit too jarring. So we are still using it in one place in the game, actually, which is the core, without spoiling it too much. But we replaced some of the other water surfaces. Some of the other water surfaces with more not traditional 3D, approaches. But that was always a thing, also, with the animation of the transportation tube systems,
Yeah.
water and stuff, and so on. So that was one thing, and I think what I personally still find quite interesting was we with the animation itself, because we were like, okay, let's try motion capturing and see how far we go with motion capturing and how much we have to change the animations to fit into our style. And once we started motion capturing, it was really interesting because we didn't change anything. It was basically just our motion captured human animations,
Yeah.
which obviously we cleaned up, but it kind of worked so well with having, again, this kind of hybrid approach of you technically are capturing humans,
Mm-hmm.
but because of the different proportions of the characters and the general visual style, which looks very handmade, and then combined with the facial animation, which we didn't capture but generated based on audio files by using key poses instead of smooth animation, all these individual elements together, made this very, consistent looking look, which doesn't shout, at least, oh, I'm super digital,
Yeah.
but kind of works all together. Yeah, that was really interesting.
It is quite a unique blend that you have achieved, like where you like you two are on the call. I'm not likely to say otherwise, but I do really mean that you kind of nailed what you were going for, in the sense of like this handmade feeling that doesn't really get in the way too much of the general interactivity of a video game, and lends itself to this new kind of visual and interactive experience. And even in the way that the water works, it's funny that you talk about the water, because, and I just mean like visually and everything, because getting into seeing someone go down the tubes for the first time, you're like, whoa, that's fucking cool. Like just, and the way that the water behaves is very clearly a distinct visual decision that makes me, the player, go, is how are they doing that? Is that what? And then you're like, oh, of course that's not stop motion, but like, oh, interesting. Are they doing it with rigid body stuff, or it just throws around a bunch of questions. And I found myself doing that at numerous points throughout it. It's really, really quite wonderful. Just the experience of, well, experiencing the handmade nature of your work in Harold Halibut.
Nice.
It's really
Thank
cool.
you.
Thank you.
So, are you guys taking a big long break now, or what's the deal? I mean, you've been at this for like 14 years, or are you already like bang 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 throwing ideas around for the next thing?
Both.
Very
So
good.
yeah, so
Classic common answer, right? You
yeah,
can't take a break without throwing some ideas around.
exactly. So we maybe it's because we were working on it for 14 years. We even had like several ideas during the
Of
development of
course.
Parallel,
Yeah.
but they never advanced past the point of being an idea. And now that the game is out, obviously we needed a break. And
Yeah.
right now it is mostly the break. First of all, it's actually I think the most like tiring time was the month after release, because we thought
Yeah.
everything before everything was planned, and we thought like, okay, we can take a break now, and suddenly there were like all these mails and stuff that we had to do, just organize, and none of that was planned. So that was kind of like overwhelming a little bit, but now things have calmed down a little bit. So yeah, I went on vacation. Ole is going to on vacation like sometime next week and so on. So yeah, definitely the break. And then at some point next month or so, we wanted to talk about like the future things. But in between, we again had several new game ideas as well, but also other ideas for other projects, other potential projects. One thing that we are definitely thinking about is, I mean, first of all, our next project, no matter what it was, uh, like even the longest game we would work on wouldn't take 14 years, because people think, oh, it's because the stop motion style. It's obvious they built all this stuff. It took so
Mm.
long, but I mean, you might have briefly got it from like the timeline we told. A lot of it was just getting into game development in
Yeah.
general, learning a lot of stuff, and also constant budget problems. So we have
Yeah.
always had stretches where we scaled down the team again, because we didn't have any funds, where we worked on our own, or had to see where we get money. So basically, if we did the same game, it would probably be more a 4 or 5 year development
Yeah.
cycle. But still, we were thinking about maybe working on something shorter, something that we could do in like 2 years or so for the next
Yeah.
thing,
Cool.
maybe. But again, it might take 8 years. Who knows? We'd also thought it would only. Like I
That's
said,
classic game development. I remember
exactly.
Mello started
Yeah.
with us in like all sitting around having that same sort of thing that you were talking about, Ole. Like, yeah, it could be this, could be that, could be that. And then at the end, we're like, all right, so it's going to be a card game. You play with your friends, digital card game. We'll get it done in like 6 weeks. And then it took us 10 hours to get it out.
Yeah,
It's just the way that it works.
yeah, yeah.
Um, Hell yeah! Well, cool. Because it's summer over there, so you're. It's definitely holiday time as well. I can imagine too with everything that you've set up. Do you? There's one thing to like now know how to make games, quote unquote. It can sound like a bit of a
Yeah.
gatekeepery term, but I mean just like literally, having shipped your sort of first, you know,
Yeah.
and funnily enough, major video game, right? Like your debut, like the power that you must be feeling at your fingertips. But I imagine as well with all of this, this trailblazing that you've done into this, this verdant new territory within the medium that I was talking about, both technically and sort of artistically. Um, Pipelines, do you feel that you have things like great pipelines and stuff set up? Like, is part of that time that you're talking about, like being able to do something like a Harold again in 4 to 5 years, does a lot of that have to do because you've now got your sort of processes down and you've got particular pipelines? You've got the IKEA table is still working, you've got a backup members for your cameras, you're ready to go.
In fact, we have a motorized one now, an automated. So
That's what I'm talking about, ready to go.
it had to eventually go. I mean, yeah.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, definitely. It's so because all these. By the way, that we didn't mention that we know that whichever game we make, like our processes are established, and our team is very specific to our
Yeah.
style. That everything that we would work in the future would definitely be with the same workflow, with the same style, kind of.
Yeah.
And yeah, because the workflows are established. In fact, the time it takes for us to create a character, for example, our way, isn't longer than it would take to create something in the same quality level,
Mm.
just using purely 3D. So that just
I imagine some aspects of it has to be faster as well, like to
yeah,
reach
yeah.
the finished product almost. Yeah.
Exactly, because you get, like, for example, a lot of details for free. Then other aspects might take a little longer, But again, because there is like that, yeah. So it's,
Yeah.
I think if you just combine the total time, it would be a very similar process in terms of the creation time of these things.
Mhm.
Um, and it's definitely more interesting because you have more different ways of working on it than just sitting in front of a computer, which is, for example, a big problem for Fabi, one of our colleagues. He hates working on the computer,
Yeah.
and Ola, I think for you
I
it's
kind of
also
feel the
there.
same
Yeah,
sometimes.
yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
Ola, I think it's similar for you. You don't hate it, but I think you like the having both, right? So
yeah, definitely. And I much prefer to if I can stay away from it, especially over
Mm.
time. I found that like I'm really ready to like revert to non-digital ways of working. I don't know. It's,
yeah,
um,
and
yeah.
Mm.
and it definitely feels like if a good place to be in right now, that we did so many experiments, we figured out a lot of things, and we now have an established workflow. We have a company that exists already, all these things that took us so long time. I mean, it took us like a year to found our company because it's all this German bureaucracy, and we didn't have any idea how to do that. So
Yeah.
everything, just like everything, or to get the first funding, it took us like 1.5 years,
Mm.
and we got another concept funding in between for to fund the idea of one of our potential new games, and
Yeah.
took us like 2 weeks of our work or so. So
Yeah.
it's a totally, and it's basically the same thing, right? It's always, if you are figuring out how to do things, it just takes a while. And it's nice to be in this state now where everything is kind of established, and we can just start actually working on whatever we want to work on, that which is really nice.
Well, I can hear the energy in your voice on that.
Yeah.
The same energy that I was alluding to that must have been there at the start in 2010 that got Ole
Yes.
to come back from across the world. So I'm very excited for whatever is next. It's good to know that whatever it will be handmade as well. I fully support your decision, Ole. I think I need a little bit more time off the computer as well. So I'm going to I'm going to pursue your hybrid model at least. Try and touch grass a little bit more often, inspired by the
Yeah.
two of you. Again, congratulations on the release. I mean, you said it took you a long time, but like the fact that you got it done, shipping any game, I'm convinced is just a series of small to large miracles back to back. Especially when you throw in a global pandemic and a bunch of other stuff. So, congratulations on the release. I'm truly enjoying the game, having a good time with it, and I really do encourage all of our listeners to check it out. Like, even if it's on Game Pass, so you don't even have the excuse that you don't have the excuse. All right, just grab it, check it out. It's absolutely delightful experience, honestly, to just soak into your eyeballs as you're moving around the place. And thanks both of you for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having
It
us.
was,
This was so
yeah,
lovely.
yeah,
You're welcome.
definitely.
Cool. We'll do it again in, what did you say, 5 to 6 years' time?
Yeah,
Four to five.
probably.
4 to 5, sorry.
Who knows? Who knows?
All right, guys. Cheers. Have a good day.
Thanks, Trent. Bye.
You too. Bye.